The air of Teralia was perpetually thick with ash. It fell like snow, coating the ruins of once magnificent cities in a blanket of gray that muted all sound and dulled all colors. 200 years after the Great Collapse, nature had reclaimed much of what civilization had built, but the ash remained, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Orion Vale pulled his scarf tighter around his mouth and nose as he descended into the excavation site. The ancient temple's fallen pillars created a natural maze that he navigated with practiced ease, his boots leaving distinct footprints in the thick layer of ash. His pack was light. He traveled with only the essentials: tools for digging, rations for 3 days, and a small collection of trinkets he'd already salvaged from the ruins. Archaeology wasn't a respected profession anymore, not since the collapse. Now, it was merely a means of survival. Find something valuable, sell it to the highest bidder, eat for another week. But Orion wasn't like the other scavengers. He documented everything he found, kept detailed records of where each artifact came from, what markings adorned it, what purpose it might have served. Knowledge was currency too, he believed, though fewer and fewer people seemed to share that belief. The Temple of the Elar dynasty had been sealed for centuries, its entrance only recently exposed by the seasonal earthquakes that plagued the region. Orion had tracked the rumors for weeks, bribed the right officials, and now he stood in the antechamber of what could be the greatest discovery of his career, if anyone still cared about such things. His handheld scanner whirred softly as he swept it across the walls, translating the ancient script that decorated the stone. The Elars had been masters of both technology and magic, creating wonders that merged the two in ways that modern scholars still couldn't fully comprehend. Their civilization had been at its peak just before the collapse, and then silence. History became ash, just like everything else. "Come on," Orion muttered to himself, his voice muffled by his scarf. "Show me something worth the trip." The scanner's light flickered as it passed over a section of wall that appeared no different from the rest. But the device beeped insistently, indicating something unusual. Orion ran his gloved fingers over the stone, feeling for any irregularity. There, a seam, almost invisible to the naked eye. He pressed gently, and a section of the wall slid aside with surprising ease, revealing a small chamber beyond. The air that rushed out was stale but somehow charged, making the hair on Orion's arms stand on end beneath his protective clothing. Inside the chamber stood a simple pedestal, and resting upon it was a sword. Orion approached cautiously. The sword was unlike any he had seen before. Its blade was pitch black, seeming to absorb the light from his headlamp rather than reflect it. The hilt was adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. There were no gemstones, no gold filigree, none of the ostentatious decorations one might expect from a royal artifact. Just elegant, functional design and that strange, light-drinking metal. His scanner went wild when he pointed it at the sword, the readings fluctuating so rapidly that the device eventually shut down with a pathetic whine of protest. Orion frowned. That had never happened before. "Just what are you?" he whispered, reaching out slowly. Common sense told him not to touch unknown artifacts without proper precautions. But something about this sword called to him. His fingers hovered inches from the hilt, and he could swear he felt a pulse of energy, like a heartbeat, emanating from the metal. When his skin finally made contact, a jolt of sensation, not quite pain, not quite pleasure, shot up his arm. The sword felt warm, despite the chill of the chamber. For a moment, Orion thought he heard a whisper, a voice so faint it might have been just the wind through the ruins above. But there was no wind down here, in this sealed chamber, untouched for centuries. He lifted the sword from its pedestal, surprised by its perfect balance. It was lighter than it looked, practically weightless in his hand. The blade hummed faintly. A sound felt more than heard, reverberating through his bones. "You'll fetch a fine price," he said, though something inside him rebelled at the thought of selling this particular find. This wasn't just another artifact. It was special, significant in ways he couldn't yet understand. As he turned to leave, sword carefully wrapped and stowed in his pack, the ground beneath him trembled. Not unusual in Tyralia, but the timing made Orion uneasy. He quickened his pace, navigating back through the labyrinth of fallen stone. The tremors intensified as he neared the surface, and by the time he emerged into the ashen daylight, the earth was shaking violently enough to dislodge fragments of the ruins around him. Orion sprinted across the excavation site, dodging falling debris until he reached the relative safety of open ground. Only then did he look back to see the temple entrance collapse entirely, sealing whatever secrets remained inside forever. The coincidence was too perfect to be natural. The temple had stood for centuries, only to fall minutes after he removed the sword. The tremors subsided as quickly as they had begun, leaving Orion standing alone in a cloud of disturbed ash, clutching his pack to his chest, the wrapped sword a comforting weight against his back. "What have I just done?" he whispered to the silent ruins. No answer came. But as the ash settled around him once more, Orion couldn't shake the feeling that something had awakened, something that had been sleeping for a very long time. The journey back to the settlement of New Haven took 3 days on foot. Orion could have shortened the trip if he'd been willing to use the public transit system, ancient electromagnetic rails that somehow still functioned after the collapse. But he preferred to avoid official scrutiny when carrying valuable finds. The wilderness routes were dangerous, populated by outcasts and creatures warped by lingering magical energy. But Orion knew how to move quietly and when to hide. Throughout the journey, he was acutely aware of the sword strapped to his back. Its weight seemed to shift subtly as he walked, sometimes feeling heavier, sometimes nearly weightless. Occasionally, when he made camp for the night and sat staring into his small fire, he would unwrap it and study the strange patterns on the hilt, the way the firelight seemed to disappear into the blade rather than dance along its edge. On the second night, he tested its sharpness against a fallen branch. The sword sliced through the wood with almost no resistance, leaving a cut so clean it looked machine-made. But more strangely, the cut edges resonated with a musical hum that persisted for several minutes, a sound that made Orion's teeth ache and his vision blur slightly. "Definitely not normal," he muttered, carefully rewrapping the sword. He'd need to consult his archives once he returned to New Haven, see if there were any references to black-bladed weapons in the Elar dynasty records. New Haven appeared on the horizon, late on the third day. A hodgepodge of ancient structures and newer, cruder buildings, cobbled together from salvaged materials. The settlement had formed around an old university complex that had partially survived the collapse, its knowledge vaults protected by technology that modern engineers could maintain, but not replicate. Orion headed straight for his workshop in the less reputable district of the settlement. The small building had once been a storage facility, its reinforced walls and hidden basement now serving as both his home and his private archive. Few people knew how extensive his collection of books and records had become. Information was valuable, and in Tyralia, valuable things attracted dangerous attention. He sealed the door behind him, activated the security system, a mixture of scavenged tech and minor protective enchantments he'd traded for years ago, and finally allowed himself to relax. Home, or the closest thing to it in this ashen world. Orion unwrapped the sword and placed it on his workbench, surrounding it with his most sensitive scanning equipment. For hours, he documented every aspect of the weapon, from its precise dimensions to the patterns on the hilt, which he now recognized as a highly stylized form of Elar script. His translation programs struggled with the archaic dialect, but eventually produced a partial reading. Whisper and Awakening were repeated several times, along with fragments that might have been Guardian or Watcher. Whisper of the Awakening, Orion mused, tracing a finger along the script. Or Guardian of the Whisper? He searched his archives for references to such a weapon, but found nothing conclusive. The black metal remained a mystery as well. None of his equipment could identify its composition. It wasn't steel, wasn't titanium, wasn't any alloy registered in his extensive materials database. Exhausted, but reluctant to sleep, Orion finally set aside his tools and sat back, regarding the sword with a mixture of frustration and fascination. "What are you?" he asked aloud, not expecting an answer. The sword hummed faintly in response, a sound so low he felt it more than heard it. The vibration traveled up through the workbench, into his arms, resonating in his chest cavity. Orion leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair in his haste. The sword shouldn't be doing that. It was an inanimate object, a relic, not a... A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Orion froze. No one should know he was back yet. He hadn't reported to any of his usual contacts or buyers. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Quickly, Orion wrapped the sword and stowed it beneath a hidden panel in the floor before approaching the door. His security scanner showed 3 figures outside, 2 in the distinctive armor of the Order of the Wake, and between them, a woman in flowing robes that marked her as a high-ranking official. The Order of the Wake, religious zealots who believed the collapse had been divine punishment for humanity's fusion of technology and magic. They sought to purify the world by destroying artifacts from before the collapse, particularly those that showed signs of enchantment. Orion's heart raced. How had they found him so quickly? And what did they want? He considered his options. He could pretend to be out. But the Order was known for their persistence and their willingness to break down doors. He could try to escape through his emergency exit, but that would mean abandoning his archives, his life's work. With a resigned sigh, he deactivated his security system and opened the door just enough to peer out. "Can I help you?" he asked, feigning ignorance. The woman in robes stepped forward. She was older than Orion had expected, with silver hair pulled back in a severe style and eyes so pale they were almost colorless. "Archaeologist Vale," she said, her voice surprisingly melodic. "I am Grand Mage Celestria of the Order of the Wake. We wish to speak with you about your recent expedition." Orion maintained his neutral expression with effort. "I don't recall filing any expedition reports recently." One of the armored figures, Wake Knights, they called themselves, stepped forward menacingly, but Celestria raised a hand to halt him. "Come now, Mr. Vale. We both know you've just returned from the Eastern Ruins, specifically the Temple of Alar, and we have reason to believe you've recovered an item of significant interest." "The temple collapsed," Orion said carefully. "Any artifacts inside would have been destroyed." Celestria's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. "Indeed. How convenient that it collapsed immediately after you removed the Whisper Blade from its resting place." Orion felt a chill that had nothing to do with the perpetually cool air of Teralia. They knew. Somehow, they knew not just about his expedition, but about the sword specifically. Had they been tracking him? Did they have spies within the ruins? "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, preparing to slam the door shut. Celestria moved with surprising speed for her apparent age, wedging her foot in the doorway. "The sword belongs to the awakened queen," she said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "It is her birthright, and we intend to see it returned to her." "The awakened queen?" Orion repeated, confusion momentarily overriding his caution. "What fairy tale is this?" "Not a tale," Celestria said. "A prophecy. After 2 centuries of slumber, the last heir of Elar will awaken to reclaim her throne and usher in a new age for Teralia. The sword is key to her ascension." Orion had heard plenty of doomsday cults and restoration movements in his time. Everyone wanted to believe that someone would come along and fix the broken world, return it to some imagined golden age. The Order of the Wake had always seemed more pragmatic than that, focused on preventing another collapse, rather than reversing the last one. "Look," he said, "I'm just an archaeologist. I document and preserve whatever fairy tales you believe." "We can pay," interrupted one of the Wake Knights, his voice muffled by his helmet. "Name your price." That gave Orion pause. The Order was not known for purchasing artifacts. They typically confiscated them by force, then destroyed them in public ceremonies. "If it exists," Orion said carefully, "such an artifact would be priceless, a unique piece of history." "History," Celestria spat the word like a curse. "The past is dead. Mr. Vale, we're concerned with the future. The sword for 1,000 gold pieces, enough to fund your little excavations for years to come." It was an enormous sum, far more than Orion could hope to get from any museum or private collector. With that kind of money, he could expand his archives, fund proper expeditions with real security, maybe even establish a legitimate research center. "And yet, I'll need to consider your offer," he said finally. "Hypothetically speaking, of course." Celestria's eyes narrowed. "Don't take too long. The Queen awakens, with or without her blade." She withdrew her foot, allowing Orion to close the door. "We'll return tomorrow for your answer." Orion secured the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. What had he stumbled into? A simple salvage operation had somehow entangled him in religious prophecies and talks of awakening queens. And why would the Order, with their hatred of ancient magic, want to deliver a clearly enchanted weapon to this supposed heir? None of it made sense, and when things didn't make sense in Terralia, they usually turned out to be dangerous. Orion retrieved the sword from its hiding place and laid it on his table once more. In the dim light of his workshop, the blade seemed to pulse with an inner darkness, like a slice of night given physical form. "What are you really?" he murmured. "And who is this queen they think you belong to?" As if in response, the sword hummed again, the vibration stronger this time, rattling the tools on his workbench. The sound grew in intensity, until Orion had to cover his ears, his vision blurring as the resonance affected his inner ear. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. In the ringing silence that followed, Orion heard something new, a voice, faint but distinct, speaking words he couldn't quite make out. He leaned closer to the sword, straining to hear. "The return what is mine." Orion jerked back as if burned. The voice had not come from the sword, but from behind him. He spun around, searching the shadows of his workshop, but he was alone. "Who's there?" he demanded, reaching for the stunner he kept for emergencies. No answer came. Orion circled his workshop twice, checking every corner, every possible hiding place, but found nothing. He was about to convince himself he'd imagined the voice, stress and lack of sleep playing tricks on his mind, when the sword hummed once more. A gentler sound this time, almost like a contented sigh. And with sudden clarity, Orion understood. The voice had come from the sword itself, or rather, from whoever was connected to it. He had two choices: sell the sword to the Order for a fortune and walk away, or keep it and unravel its mystery himself, potentially making an enemy of one of the most powerful organizations in Terralia. The sensible choice was obvious. And yet, as Orion carefully rewrapped the sword and placed it in a more secure hiding spot beneath the floorboards of his sleeping quarters, he knew he had already decided. He was an archaeologist, after all. Solving mysteries was what he did. Tomorrow, he would begin his research in earnest. The Order of the Wake would return for their answer, and Orion Vale would be ready for them, one way or another. Sleep did not come easily to Orion that night. When he finally drifted off, His dreams were filled with ash and whispers, and a woman's face he couldn't quite see, calling to him from across a vast distance. Morning in New Haven brought no real daylight, just a lightening of the perpetual ashen haze that hung over the settlement. Orion rose early, his body stiff from tossing and turning all night. The sword's hiding place remained undisturbed, but he could feel its presence like a low-level hum at the edge of his awareness. He needed information, and for that, he needed to risk a trip to the knowledge vaults, located in the heart of the old university complex. The vaults housed what remained of humanity's accumulated wisdom, books, records, and data storage devices that had survived the collapse. Access was restricted, controlled by the settlement's governing council, but Orion had cultivated relationships with several archivists over the years. If anyone knew about black-bladed swords and sleeping queens, it would be Vault Master Thorn. Orion dressed carefully, choosing clothing that wouldn't mark him as an archaeologist, a profession viewed with suspicion by many in authority. He selected a simple tunic and trousers in the muted colors favored by scholars, covered by a plain gray cloak that would help him blend into the ashen streets. Before leaving, he hesitated over the sword. Logic dictated he leave it hidden in his workshop, but some instinct told him not to let it out of his possession. After a moment's deliberation, he wrapped it in plain cloth and secured it to his back beneath his cloak. Its weight was reassuring, somehow. The streets of New Haven were already bustling despite the early hour. Vendors called out their wares, mostly salvage tech and ration supplements, while citizens hurried about their business, faces obscured by the protective masks everyone wore against the ash. Orion kept his head down, avoiding eye contact, moving purposefully toward the university district. He was halfway there when he noticed he was being followed. Two figures in plain clothing, moving too casually, their eyes tracking him too intently. Not Order of the Wake. They lacked the religious insignia, but definitely not ordinary citizens either. Mercenaries, perhaps, hired by Celestria as insurance. Orion cut through a narrow alleyway, quickening his pace. The knowledge vaults would be safe, neutral territory protected by ancient laws that even the Order respected. If he could reach them before his pursuers caught up. He emerged from the alley into a small square dominated by a half-collapsed statue, some forgotten hero of the pre-collapse era. As he skirted around its base, a figure stepped into his path. In a hurry, archaeologist? The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in simple but well-maintained clothing. No visible weapons, but his stance suggested military training. "Just late for an appointment," Orion replied, trying to step around him. The man moved to block his path again. The Grand Mage doesn't appreciate being kept waiting. So they were with the Order after all, just not in official capacity. Celestria was cleverer than Orion had given her credit for. "I believe we agreed on this afternoon," Orion said, aware that the two followers from before had now entered the square behind him, cutting off his retreat. "Plans change," the man said with a shrug. "She wants to see you now, and the item you recovered." Orion's hand moved instinctively toward his back, where the sword lay hidden. "I haven't decided if I'm selling yet." The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not really how this works. Archaeologist. The sword belongs to the Queen. We're simply retrieving it for her." "And yet yesterday you offered to buy it," Orion pointed out, "which suggests it isn't actually yours to begin with." The man's expression hardened. "Last chance to do this the easy way." Orion had never been much of a fighter. Archaeologists who survived in Terralia did so by avoiding conflict, not confronting it. But he'd picked up a few tricks over the years. "Fine," he said, reaching slowly into his cloak as if to retrieve the sword. Instead, his fingers closed around a small metal sphere, a noise disruptor. Technically illegal, but invaluable for distracting the aggressive wildlife that sometimes inhabited ruins. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed the sphere to the ground between them. It detonated with a sound like thunder, emitting a pulse of energy that momentarily disoriented anyone within 10 feet. Orion was already moving, ducking past the staggering man and sprinting toward the university district. Behind him, he heard shouts and the sound of pursuit, but he had a head start now. The massive gates of the knowledge vaults appeared ahead, their ancient metal surfaces etched with symbols of learning and wisdom. Two guards in the blue uniforms of the university watch stood at attention, their expressions hidden behind protective masks, but their posture alert. "Sanctuary!" Orion called out as he approached, using the traditional appeal that dated back to the early post-collapse days, when knowledge seekers were granted protection from persecution. The guards straightened, hands moving to their weapons, not drawing them, but ready. One stepped forward as Orion reached the gates, breathing hard. "State your business, petitioner," the guard said formally. "Research consult with Master Thorn," Orion gasped. "I'm being pursued by agents of the Order of the Wake." At the mention of the Order, both guards tensed. The relationship between the knowledge vaults and the religious organization had always been strained, their fundamental philosophies at odds. "Do you carry contraband?" the guard asked, eyeing Orion's disheveled appearance. "Only historical artifacts for authentication," Orion replied, using the standard phrasing that would allow him entry with the sword. It wasn't exactly a lie. He did want the sword authenticated, among other things. The guard nodded and stepped aside, gesturing for Orion to pass through the smaller pedestrian gate beside the main entrance. "Sanctuary is granted for one-day cycle. Surrender all weapons to the checkpoint inside." Orion slipped through the gate just as his pursuers entered the square before the vaults. He heard them shout, but the heavy metal gate swung shut behind him, cutting off the sound. Inside, the atmosphere changed immediately. The air was cleaner, filtered through ancient systems that still functioned perfectly. The noise of the settlement faded, replaced by the hushed sounds of scholars at work. The central courtyard of the vaults was a peaceful oasis, with real plants growing in carefully tended beds. One of the few places in New Haven where green things thrived. Orion approached the checkpoint, a small kiosk where a bored-looking attendant sat. He surrendered his stunner, but made no mention of the sword on his back. Archaeological artifacts were exempt from the weapons prohibition, and the wrappings concealed its true nature. The attendant waved him through with barely a glance. The main library of the knowledge vaults was housed in what had once been the university's central administration building. Its grand hall had been converted into a repository for thousands of books, scrolls, and data tablets, all carefully preserved against the ravages of time and ash. Scholars moved quietly among the shelves, their soft footsteps and occasional whispers the only sounds disturbing the reverent silence. Orion made his way to the rear of the hall, where a spiral staircase led to the private offices of the senior archivists. Master Thorn's domain was at the very top, a circular room with windows that offered one of the few clear views of the sky above New Haven. Currently the usual flat gray, but occasionally, on rare days, blue would peek through the ashen clouds. He knocked softly on the wooden door. "Enter!" called a gruff voice from within. Vault Master Thorn was a small, wiry man with a wild mane of white hair that contrasted sharply with his dark skin. His eyes, magnified by thick spectacles, were keen and intelligent, missing nothing as Orion entered and closed the door behind him. "Ah, young Vale," Thorn said, setting aside the ancient book he'd been examining. "To what do I owe the pleasure? And why do you look like you've just outrun a horror from the deep ruins?" "Because I've been running from something almost as dangerous," Orion replied, dropping into the chair opposite Thorn's cluttered desk. "The Order of the Wake is after me. Or rather, after something I found." Thorn's bushy eyebrows rose. "You do lead an interesting life for a supposed scholar." He leaned forward. "What have you found that has the zealots in such a state?" Orion hesitated, then carefully removed the wrapped bundle from beneath his cloak. "I need information, Master Thorn. About the Elar dynasty, a black sword called the Whisper Blade, and something called the Awakened Queen. Thorn went very still, his magnified eyes fixed on the wrapped object. "Show me," he said quietly. Orion unwrapped the sword and laid it on the desk between them. In the clear light filtering through Thorn's windows, the blade seemed even darker, if that were possible, like a tear in the fabric of reality. Thorn made no move to touch it. "Where did you find this?" "In a sealed chamber beneath the eastern temple of Elar. It was on a pedestal, as if waiting." "It was waiting," Thorn murmured, leaning close to examine the hilt without touching it. "For 200 years. It has been waiting." He looked up at Orion, his expression grave. "Do you have any idea what you've done by removing it from its resting place?" Orion shifted uncomfortably. "The Order seems to think I've set in motion some prophecy about a sleeping queen awakening." "Not a prophecy," Thorn corrected. "History. Or perhaps future history." He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "What do you know of the final days before the collapse?" "Only what everyone knows," Orion replied. "There was a war. Technology and magic were used as weapons on a scale never seen before. The world burned, civilization fell, and the ash has been falling ever since." Thorn nodded. "The simplified version. Yes. But there are details that few remember." He rose and crossed to one of the many bookshelves lining his office, running a finger along the spines until he found what he sought. A slim volume bound in faded red leather. "The last ruler of the Elar dynasty was Queen Elysia," Thorn said, returning to his desk and opening the book to reveal pages of handwritten text. "She was not just a political leader, but a powerful practitioner of the old arts, what we now call magic, though they had a different name for it then. When the war reached its peak and it became clear that total destruction was imminent, she enacted a desperate plan." Thorn turned the book toward Orion, showing a detailed illustration of a woman placing a black sword onto a pedestal. Her features were finely drawn, high cheekbones, determined eyes, a mouth set in a grim line of resolve. Queen Elysia used ancient magic to place herself in a state of suspended animation, a sleep so deep it bordered on death. Her consciousness was partially transferred into the Whisper Blade, which served as both anchor and key. As long as the sword remained on its pedestal, she would continue to sleep, preserved against the destruction of the world above. When the time was right, when the world had healed enough to sustain life properly again, the sword was supposed to be claimed by her chosen heir, awakening Elysia to rebuild civilization. Orion stared at the illustration, then at the sword on the desk. "But I'm not her heir. I'm just an archaeologist who happened to find it." "And yet it responded to you," Thorn said. Not a question, but a statement. "You've heard it whisper." Orion nodded slowly. "Last night, it said, 'Return what is mine.'" "She," Thorn corrected. "Not it. Part of Elysia's consciousness resides within the blade. What you heard was her voice, reaching across 2 centuries of sleep." "So the Order is right? There really is an awakened queen?" Thorn's expression darkened. "The Order of the Wake has twisted the truth to serve their own ends. They don't serve Elysia or her legacy. Quite the opposite. They've spent generations hunting down and destroying artifacts of the old world, particularly those containing magical energy. Why would they suddenly want to deliver this most powerful of relics to its rightful owner? It was a good question, and one that had bothered Orion from the start. Celestria mentioned a price, 1,000 gold pieces. Thorn snorted. A pittance compared to the true value of the Whisper Blade. No, they want the sword for something else entirely. He closed the book carefully. You need to take it to the Sound Cathedral in the Eastern District. There's someone there who can help you understand what's truly at stake. The Sound Cathedral? Orion frowned. But that's just a ruin. No one's maintained it for decades. Appearances can be deceiving, especially in Terralia. Thorn said with a small smile. Ask for Archon. Tell him Master Thorn sent you regarding the Whisper Blade. He'll know what to do. And what about the Order? They'll be watching the gates when I leave. Thorn rose and moved to a bookshelf on the far wall. He pressed a sequence of books, and a section of the shelf swung outward to reveal a narrow passage. The old evacuation tunnels. They'll take you to the Eastern District without having to cross the main settlement. Few remember they exist. Orion carefully rewrapped the sword and secured it to his back once more. Thank you, Master Thorn. I owe you. You owe the truth, young Vale. Thorn replied gravely. Find it, and honor it. The future of Terralia may depend on what you do next. With those ominous words echoing in his mind, Orion entered the hidden passage, leaving the sanctuary of the knowledge vaults behind. The evacuation tunnels beneath New Haven were a marvel of pre-collapse engineering. Despite 2 centuries of neglect, the lighting systems still functioned, casting a soft blue glow along the smooth walls. The air was stale but breathable, filtered through systems designed to last for millennia. Orion moved quickly, following Thorn's directions. The tunnel branched occasionally, but small symbols etched into the wall junctions guided his path. The sword on his back felt heavier with each step, its presence in his mind more pronounced. Several times, he thought he heard whispers just at the edge of his hearing, but when he stopped to listen, there was only silence and the faint hum of the ancient ventilation system. After what felt like hours, but was likely only 40 minutes, Orion reached a ladder leading upward to a circular hatch. He climbed carefully, pushed the hatch open, and emerged into what appeared to be a maintenance closet. Dusty shelves lined the walls, holding tools and parts whose purpose had been forgotten generations ago. The door to the closet opened into a vast, shadowy space. Orion stepped out cautiously, allowing his eyes to adjust to the dim light filtering through damaged sections of the high ceiling. He was standing in the Sound Cathedral, once the pride of Terralia's Eastern District, now a hollow shell of its former glory. The cathedral had been designed as an acoustic marvel, its vaulted ceilings and curved walls shaped to capture and amplify sound in ways that modern engineers could only dream of replicating. Even in its ruined state, Orion's footsteps echoed with unusual clarity as he moved toward the center of the enormous chamber. "Hello?" he called out, his voice bouncing back at him from multiple directions. "I'm looking for Archon. Master Thorn sent me." No response came. The cathedral appeared deserted. Random debris and ash scattered across its once polished floor. Shafts of gray light pierced the gloom from holes in the dome ceiling, creating spotlights of dust motes and slowly falling ash. Orion was about to call out again when movement caught his eye. A figure stepping from the shadows near what had once been the cathedral's grand altar. A man, tall and powerfully built, dressed in armor that resembled that worn by the Wake Knights, but without their religious insignia. His face was partly obscured by a half-helmet, but Orion could see enough to recognize the same man who had confronted him in the square earlier that day. "Archaeologist," the man said, his voice surprisingly gentle despite his intimidating appearance. "You've had quite a morning." Orion tensed, ready to flee back into the tunnels. "Are you Archon?" The man inclined his head slightly. "Sir Archon of the Awakened, yes, though the Sir is a relic of a time long past." He gestured toward a fallen column that had been positioned as a makeshift bench. "Please, sit. We have much to discuss, and less time than I would like." Orion remained standing. "You were trying to capture me this morning." "I was trying to protect the Whisper Blade," Archon corrected. "And, by extension, you. The Order of the Wake has eyes and ears throughout New Haven. When word reached us that an archaeologist had recovered the blade from the Eastern Temple, we moved to intercept you before they could. Unfortunately, they were quicker." "Us? Who exactly are you working for, if not the Order? Archon smiled thinly. I serve the true heir of Alar, the rightful owner of the blade you carry. As if on cue, the sword on Orion's back hummed, the vibration traveling down his spine. The whisper came again, clearer this time. Return what is mine, finder of lost things. Orion spun around, but there was no one behind him. The voice had sounded so close, as if spoken directly into his ear. You hear her, Archon observed. Good. That means the connection is strengthening. He gestured again to the makeshift bench. Please, sit. I'm not your enemy. After a moment's hesitation, Orion perched on the edge of the fallen column. Archon remained standing, his posture that of a soldier at ease but ready. The blade you carry is more than just a weapon, Archon began. It is a key, a vessel, and a bridge, all in one. For 200 years, it has waited in that temple, preserving the essence of Queen Elysia until the time was right for her return. So there really is a sleeping queen, Orion said. Thorn told me as much, but it sounds like something from a children's tale. Most tales have their roots in truth. Archon replied, Queen Elysia sacrificed herself to save what she could of Teralia. When the final battle of the Old War reached its peak, when it became clear that destruction was inevitable, she enacted an ancient ritual. She placed herself in a state of suspended animation, binding her consciousness partially to the Whisper Blade and partially to her physical form, which lies protected in a chamber deep beneath this very cathedral. Orion looked around at the crumbling structure with skepticism. This doesn't seem like much of a protection. Appearances. Archaeologist. The ruin above is just that, a ruin. But below, protected by technologies and enchantments, even I don't fully understand, lies the heart of old Teralia. The Queen's sanctuary remains intact. Waiting. Waiting for what or whom? Archon studied Orion with a penetrating gaze. For the right person to find the blade and awaken her. For 2 centuries, the awakened, those loyal to Elysia's vision, have protected her sanctuary and waited for the signs. When the blade was removed from its pedestal, we knew the time had come. But why me? I'm no one special. I just happened to find the sword. Nothing happens by chance where the Whisper Blade is concerned, Archon said. It called to you, guided you to its resting place, and now it speaks to you. These are not coincidences. The sword hummed against Orion's back again, as if in agreement. He reached back and touched it through its wrappings, feeling a pulse of warmth beneath his fingers. What does the Order want with it? He asked. If they hate old magic, why try to buy the sword instead of destroying it? Archon's expression darkened. Grand Mage Celestria is not what she appears. The Order of the Wake was founded with noble intentions, to prevent the misuse of power that led to the collapse. But over generations, it has been corrupted from within. Celestria seeks the blade not to return it to Elysia, but to perform a ritual of her own. She believes she can extract the Queen's essence from the blade and absorb it herself, gaining the powers of an Alar Royal without the accompanying responsibility or wisdom. And what would happen to the real Queen if she did that? Death, final and permanent, and with her would die the last hope of restoring Teralia to what it once was, a place of balance between technology and magic, where ash doesn't forever fall from the sky. Orion was silent for a moment, processing this information. It seemed fantastical, the kind of story told around fires to give people hope in a broken world. And yet, the sword on his back hummed with undeniable power, and the voice he'd heard had been too real to dismiss. What do you want me to do? He finally asked. Take the blade to its rightful owner, Archon said simply. Complete the awakening that began when you removed it from its pedestal. And how exactly do I do that? I will guide you to the Queen's sanctuary. Once there, you must place the blade in her hands. The rest will happen as it was meant to. It sounded too easy, which immediately made Orion suspicious. If it's that simple, why haven't you or the other Awakened done it yourselves over the past 2 centuries? Because the blade could not be removed from its pedestal by any of us, Arkan explained. It was attuned to respond only to someone with no prior allegiance, neither Awakened nor Order. Someone who would make the choice freely, based on their own judgment, rather than existing loyalty. Someone like me, Orion said with growing understanding. An archaeologist with no stake in your religious conflicts. Precisely. You are, in essence, a neutral third party. Your decision to bring the blade here rather than sell it to the Order was the first test. What you choose to do next is the second. Orion stood, restless energy, driving him to pace. And if I choose to walk away, to take the sword and leave New Haven entirely? Then Celestria will hunt you to the ends of Terralia, Arkan said, matter-of-factly. The blade's power is awakening now that it has been removed from its resting place. It will continue to call out, to be heard by those sensitive to such things. You would never know peace again. Not much of a choice, then. There is always choice, archaeologist. But some paths lead to better outcomes than others. Orion stopped pacing and faced Arkan directly. Show me this sanctuary. I want to see the Queen for myself before I decide anything. Arkan nodded, apparently satisfied. A reasonable request. He moved toward the ruined altar and pressed a sequence of seemingly random stones in its base. With a grinding sound, a section of the floor nearby slid open, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. After you, Arkan said, gesturing to the opening. Orion approached cautiously, peering down into the shadows. How do I know this isn't a trap? You don't, Arkan admitted. But consider, if I meant you harm, why bother with this elaborate story? I could have simply taken the blade by force when you entered the cathedral. It was a fair point, and despite his skepticism, Orion felt a pull, not just curiosity, but something deeper, as if the sword itself was urging him forward. With a deep breath, he began to descend the stairs, Arkan following close behind. The stairway was steep but well constructed, the steps showing none of the wear one would expect after 2 centuries. As they descended, the temperature gradually dropped, and the air took on a strange quality, cleaner than even the filtered atmosphere of the knowledge vaults. With a subtle scent that reminded Orion of rain, a rare enough occurrence in ash-covered Terralia that he'd only experienced it a handful of times. The stairs ended in a long corridor, its walls lined with crystalline structures that emitted a soft, blue-white light. The floor was smooth stone, unmarked by ash or debris, as pristine as if it had been polished that morning. The sanctuary has been sealed since the collapse, Arkan explained as they walked, protected by both physical barriers and energy fields that repel the ash and prevent deterioration. Orion ran a hand along one wall, feeling a slight vibration beneath his fingertips. Some kind of stasis technology, combined with what you would call magic. Yes. The LRs didn't distinguish between the two as we do now. To them, all forms of energy manipulation were branches of the same discipline. They passed several closed doors before reaching the end of the corridor, where a pair of massive doors stood. Unlike the utilitarian design of the passage, these doors were ornate, covered in intricate patterns, similar to those on the hilt of the Whisper Blade. At their center was a depression, shaped exactly like the sword. The key to the sanctuary, Arkan said, gesturing to the sword on Orion's back. Only the Whisper Blade can open these doors. Orion hesitated, then carefully unwrapped the sword. It seemed heavier now, more substantial, its dark surface reflecting nothing of the crystalline light around them. The patterns on its hilt appeared to shift and flow like liquid as he examined it. What happens when I open this door? He asked. What exactly am I going to see? The last queen of Terralia, Arkan replied simply. preserved in the moment of her sacrifice, waiting for the right person to awaken her. The sword hummed in Orion's hands, the vibration traveling up his arms to resonate in his chest. The whisper came again, stronger than before. "Return what is mine, finder of lost things. The time of awakening is upon us." With a sense of crossing a threshold from which there would be no return, Orion stepped forward and placed the sword into the depression in the door. It fit perfectly, as if made for it, which, of course, it had been. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the patterns on the door began to glow with the same blue-white light as the corridor crystals. The light traced every line and curve of the intricate design before converging on the sword. The whisper blade absorbed the light, its black surface briefly illuminated from within by veins of luminescence that mapped the internal structure of the metal. A low tone sounded, so deep it was felt more than heard, reverberating through the stone beneath their feet. The massive doors began to part, sliding silently into recesses in the walls. Beyond lay a circular chamber, its high ceiling domed like the cathedral above but intact, perfect in its preservation. The walls were lined with the same light-emitting crystals, but here they pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. The floor was a mosaic of colored stones, arranged in spiraling patterns that drew the eye inevitably to the center of the room. There, on a raised dais, lay a woman. She was preserved in what appeared to be a transparent sarcophagus, though no seams or openings were visible in its surface. She looked to be in her early 30s, with features that matched the illustration Thorne had shown Orion. High cheekbones, a strong jawline, lips set in a determined line. Her hair was dark, arranged in elaborate braids interwoven with thin chains of a metal that matched the whisper blade. She wore what must have been royal regalia, a fitted jacket of deep blue material over flowing robes, adorned with symbols of office that Orion recognized from his studies of the Elar dynasty. She looked as if she were merely sleeping, her chest rising and falling with slow, shallow breaths. There was no sign of age or decay. She could have entered this chamber yesterday rather than 2 centuries ago. "Queen Elysia," Archon said softly, reverently, "the last true ruler of Teralia." Orion approached the dais slowly, drawn forward by a mixture of archaeological fascination and something less definable, a pull, similar to what he'd felt from the sword, but stronger, more focused. The sword itself, still embedded in the door, began to emit a high, clear tone that harmonized with the deep resonance of the chamber. The sound grew in intensity until it seemed to fill every molecule of air around them. And then, suddenly, the Queen's eyes opened. They were a startling gray, the color of the ash that perpetually fell on the world above, but alive with an intelligence that immediately fixed on Orion. Her lips parted, and though the transparent sarcophagus should have muffled any sound, her voice came through with perfect clarity. "Give it back!" Orion froze, caught in that gray gaze. The voice was the same he had heard whispering from the sword, but stronger now, imbued with an undeniable authority. "The blade," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Return what is mine, finder of lost things." Archon had dropped to one knee beside Orion, head bowed. "My queen," he said, "the time has come, as you foretold." Elysia's gaze never left Orion. "You heard my call across the centuries," she said. "You found my blade when others could not. Now you must complete what you began." The transparent material covering her began to shimmer and dissolve, evaporating into the air like morning dew under a sun that no longer shone on Teralia. As the last of it disappeared, Elysia sat up, her movements fluid and graceful despite 2 centuries of immobility. Orion remained rooted to the spot, equal parts awestruck and skeptical. The rational part of his mind, the archaeologist trained to question, to seek evidence, was screaming that this was impossible. People didn't sleep for 200 years and wake up perfectly preserved. And yet, here she was, regarding him with those ash-gray eyes that seemed to see right through him. "The blade," she repeated, extending a hand. "Bring it to me." Orion glanced back at the door, where the whisper blade still sat embedded in the depression. "I'm not sure I can remove it," he said. "It seems to be part of the mechanism." "It responds to your touch now," Alicia said. "As it was meant to. Take it and complete the awakening." Something in her tone bypassed Orion's skepticism, compelling him to action. He returned to the door and grasped the hilt of the sword. It came free easily, as if eager to be moved. The doors remained open, the pattern still glowing faintly. He approached the dais once more, the sword heavy in his hands. Up close, Alicia was even more imposing. There was a presence about her, a gravity that seemed to bend the very air around her. She was beautiful in a severe way, her features suggesting intelligence and strength rather than conventional attractiveness. "Who are you, finder of lost things?" she asked, as he stopped before her. "Orion Vale," he replied, surprised by the steadiness of his voice. "Archaeologist." A slight smile curved her lips. "A seeker of the past. How fitting." She extended her hand again. "And now you must help shape the future. The blade, Orion Vale." Orion hesitated. "What happens when I give it to you? What does this awakening actually mean?" "The beginning of Terralia's restoration," she replied. "The blade contains a portion of my essence, my memories, my knowledge, my power. Without it, I am incomplete. With it, I can fulfill the purpose of my long sleep, to rebuild what was lost in the collapse." "And why should I believe that's a good thing?" Orion challenged, finding his courage. "The world before the collapse nearly destroyed itself. Why should we return to that?" Rather than anger, his question seemed to please her. "Good. You question, you doubt. This is wise." She lowered her hand. "The world before the collapse was not perfect. Orion Vale. It was a world of wonders, yes, but also of terrible imbalance. The fusion of technology and magic that the Order of the Wake so fears was not inherently evil. It was the application that led to destruction. I chose to sleep not to preserve that world, but to guide the new one that would rise from its ashes." "To what end?" "Balance," she said simply. "Harmony between the forces that shape our existence. The ash falls because the world remains out of balance. I can restore that balance, but only if I am whole." She gestured to the sword. "Only if what was divided is reunited." The sword hummed in Orion's hands, its vibration matching the pulse of the crystals along the walls. It felt right somehow, as if this moment had been inevitable from the instant he'd touched the sword in that temple chamber. And yet, doubt lingered. "The Grand Mage of the Order, Celestria. She wants the sword too. She claims to serve you." Alicia's expression hardened. "Celestria serves only herself. She seeks my power, without understanding its purpose or its price." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, archaeologist, what do your instincts say? You who have dedicated your life to preserving the past, to understanding what came before, what does your heart tell you is the right path forward?" It was a fair question. Orion had spent years excavating the remnants of the pre-collapse world, documenting and preserving what he could of a civilization that had nearly obliterated itself. He had seen wonders and horrors, technologies beyond modern comprehension and weapons that could still lay waste to what remained of humanity. But he had also seen beauty, art, and architecture that spoke of aspirations beyond mere survival, philosophies that valued knowledge and harmony, evidence of a society that, for all its flaws, had reached for something greater than itself. "I believe in preservation," he said slowly. "In learning from the past rather than burying it. The Order would destroy anything they don't understand. Celestria would use power without wisdom. He met Elysia's gaze directly. If you truly seek balance, if you can help Terralia move forward rather than simply backward, then the sword belongs with you. With those words, he extended the Whisper Blade, offering it hilt first to the awakened queen. Elysia's smile was like the break of dawn in a world that had forgotten sunlight. She took the sword with both hands, her fingers brushing against Orion's in the process. A spark of energy passed between them, neither painful nor pleasant, but intense, like a current finding its path to ground. The moment the blade was fully in her possession, the crystalline lights pulsed brighter, their rhythm accelerating. The sword itself began to glow, not with the blue-white light of the crystals, but with a soft gray luminescence that matched the color of Elysia's eyes. "The circle closes," she murmured, holding the sword before her. "What was divided is made whole." The gray light spread from the sword to her hands, traveling up her arms to envelop her entire body. She closed her eyes, her expression one of intense concentration. The light grew brighter, forcing Orion to shield his eyes. When it faded, and he could see again, Alicia stood before the dais, rather than sitting upon it. Her posture was different, straighter, more commanding. The sword was now sheathed at her side in a scabbard that hadn't been there moments before. But the most striking change was in her eyes. They now held flecks of the same darkness as the blade, as if fragments of the void had been incorporated into their ashen color. "It is done," she said, her voice resonating with new depth. "The awakening is complete." Archon, who had remained kneeling throughout the exchange, now rose to his feet. "My queen," he said. "The Order will have felt the energy surge. They will come." "Let them," Alicia replied with calm confidence. "It is time they remembered who truly rules in Terralia." She turned to Orion. "You have fulfilled your role as finder, Orion Vale. You are free to go if you wish, but I would value your continued assistance in the days ahead. Your knowledge of this new world would be invaluable to me." Before Orion could respond, a distant rumble shook the chamber, sending fine dust drifting down from the dome ceiling. "They're already here," Archon said grimly, drawing a weapon that looked like a cross between a sword and an energy pistol, another relic of the pre-collapse fusion of technologies. "They've brought an awakener." Alicia's expression darkened. "Celestria grows more reckless than I anticipated. To unleash such a creature in a populated area." "What's an awakener?" Orion asked, feeling increasingly out of his depth. "A being from the void between worlds," Alicia explained quickly. "A construct of pure energy given physical form through a combination of technology and forbidden magics. They were weapons of last resort in the war that led to the collapse, mindless, destructive, and nearly impossible to control." Another rumble, stronger this time, shook the sanctuary. Dust and small fragments of stone rained down as cracks appeared in the previously pristine ceiling. "We need to get to the surface," Archon urged. "The sanctuary won't hold against an awakener's assault." Alicia nodded and turned to Orion. "Your decision, archaeologist. Do you stand with us, or do you seek your own path?" It wasn't really a choice at all. Whatever Orion might think of ancient queens and magical swords, he knew the Order of the Wake represented a danger to everything he valued: knowledge, preservation, the lessons of the past. And if they had indeed unleashed some ancient weapon of mass destruction in New Haven, innocent people would suffer. "I'm with you," he said firmly, "though I'm not much use in a fight." Alicia's smile was quick but genuine. "You have other skills that may prove equally valuable." She gestured to the door. "Archon, lead the way. We must reach the Sound Cathedral's main chamber. Its acoustics will amplify the Whisper Blade's power, giving us a chance against the Awakener." The three of them hurried back up the corridor and the staircase, emerging into the ruined cathedral above. The difference was immediately apparent. Where before the space had been quiet and still, now it thrummed with malevolent energy. The air itself seemed to warp and distort in places, reality bending under some unnatural pressure. And at the cathedral's main entrance stood Grand Mage Celestria, flanked by a dozen Wake Knights. Before them hovered a being that defied description, a swirling mass of darkness and lightning, vaguely humanoid in shape, but constantly shifting, its edges blurring into the surrounding air. Where it touched the cathedral floor, the stone blackened and cracked. "The Awakener," Elysia murmured, her hand moving to the hilt of the whisper blade. "Celestria has bound it, but her control is tenuous at best." Celestria's voice rang out across the cathedral, amplified by the acoustic properties of the space. "The sleeping queen awakes at last. How kind of you to save me the trouble of extracting your essence from the blade." Her pale eyes gleamed with a fanatical light. "Now, I need only take it from your living form." Elysia stepped forward, her bearing regal despite the 2 centuries that separated her from her reign. "Celestria of the Wake, you meddle with forces beyond your understanding. Dismiss the Awakener and withdraw, and I may yet show mercy." Celestria's laugh was harsh, echoing from the damaged walls and ceiling. "Mercy? From a relic of the age that nearly destroyed our world? I think not." She raised her hands, which glowed with sickly green energy. "The Order of the Wake has spent generations cleansing Terralia of the corruption that you and your kind unleashed. Your time has passed, Elysia Elar. This is our world now." With a gesture from Celestria, the Awakener surged forward, its amorphous form expanding as it moved, tendrils of dark energy lashing out ahead of it. The Wake Knights spread out, drawing weapons similar to Archon's but cruder in design. "To the center of the chamber," Elysia commanded, drawing the whisper blade. The sword gleamed with inner darkness, seeming to pull light into itself. "Archon, buy us time." The knight nodded and moved to intercept the Wake Knights, his weapon discharging bolts of energy that forced them to scatter for cover among the ruins. Orion and Elysia hurried toward the center of the cathedral, where a circular mosaic in the floor mirrored the pattern in the sanctuary below. "What's the plan?" Orion asked, eyeing the approaching Awakener with growing alarm. The temperature around them was dropping rapidly, his breath now visible in the increasingly frigid air. The Sound Cathedral was built on a nexus point, a location where the energies of Terralia naturally converge. Elysia explained quickly. The Elar architects designed it to amplify and channel those energies through sound. She pointed to patterns in the floor that Orion had initially taken for decorative elements. "These are not just mosaics. They're circuit pathways for both energy and sound." Understanding dawned. "The resonance I heard when I tested the sword on a branch. It could be amplified here?" "Precisely. But I need your help to activate the full circuit. My knowledge is 2 centuries out of date, and the cathedral has suffered damage in the intervening years." "What do I need to do?" Elysia pointed to a section of the mosaic where the pattern was partially obscured by debris. "Clear that area and identify the connection points. They'll be marked with symbols similar to those on the Whisperblade's hilt." Orion dropped to his knees and began frantically brushing away ash and stone fragments, revealing more of the intricate pattern beneath. Behind him, he could hear the sounds of combat as Archon engaged the Wake Knights, energy weapons discharging with sharp cracks that echoed through the chamber. The Awakener was drawing closer, its presence causing the very air to warp around it. The temperature continued to drop, frost now forming on the stone floor and creeping outward from the creature's path. "Hurry!" Elysia urged, standing at the center of the mosaic, the whisper blade held before her in both hands. "Celestria won't be able to control it much longer." Orion worked faster, clearing the last of the debris to reveal a complete section of the pattern. As Elysia had predicted, several points in the design matched symbols from the sword's hilt. "Found them!" he called. "Now what?" "Touch each point in sequence. starting with the outermost and moving inward. Your connection to the blade will activate the circuit. Orion placed his fingers on the first symbol, a stylized spiral that seemed to shimmer slightly under his touch. A faint hum emanated from the stone, growing stronger as he moved to the next symbol and the next, working his way toward the center where Alicia stood. The mosaic began to glow with the same gray light that had enveloped Alicia during the awakening, the illuminated patterns spreading outward from his touch like ripples in water. The hum grew louder, resonating with the whisper blade in Alicia's hands. Across the cathedral, Celestria seemed to sense what they were attempting. "Stop them!" she shrieked, directing both her knights and the Awakener toward the center of the chamber. Archon was fighting valiantly, but he was outnumbered. A blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to one knee. The Wake Knights surged past him, converging on the mosaic. "Almost there," Orion muttered, touching the penultimate symbol. The vibration was intense now, making his teeth ache and his vision blur. One more. A bolt of energy struck the floor inches from his hand, sending stone fragments flying. One of the Wake Knights had reached the edge of the mosaic, weapon trained on Orion. "Step away from the circuit, archaeologist," the knight commanded, "or the next shot won't miss." Orion froze, his finger hovering over the final symbol. So close, yet now seemingly impossible to reach. "Orion," Alicia's voice cut through his fear, calm and assured. "Trust in what you have found." The whisper blade in her hands began to pulse with darkness, not just absorbing light now, but seeming to draw in sound as well. The cacophony of battle faded, replaced by a profound silence that pressed against Orion's eardrums. In that silence, he heard the whisper once more. "Complete the circle, finder of lost things." With a surge of determination, Orion lunged forward and pressed the final symbol, just as the Wake Knight fired again. The energy bolt seemed to slow in mid-air, its path distorted by the growing power of the activated circuit. The moment Orion's finger touched the last symbol, the entire mosaic erupted with gray light. The sound that had been building throughout the chamber suddenly focused, channeled through the patterns in the floor and converging on the whisper blade. Alicia raised the sword high. Its black surface now shot through with veins of luminescent gray that matched the light of the mosaic. "Terralia awakens!" she cried, her voice amplified by the cathedral's acoustics until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Awakener, which had been steadily advancing despite Archon's continued resistance, suddenly stopped. Its amorphous form shuddered and contracted, as if being compressed by an invisible force. The dark energy that composed its body began to fragment, tiny motes of blackness separating from the main mass. Celestria screamed in rage and disbelief. "No! The Awakener cannot be undone! It is bound to my will!" "Nothing is bound forever, Celestria," Alicia replied, her voice still supernaturally amplified, "especially that which was never meant to be bound in the first place." With a gesture that seemed to cut the very air, Alicia brought the whisper blade down in a vertical slash. A wave of gray energy erupted from the blade, expanding outward in a perfect circle that passed through everything in the cathedral. Wake Knights, fallen columns, Orion, Archon, and the Awakener itself. Where the wave touched the knights, they staggered but remained standing. Where it passed through the Awakener, however, the effect was dramatic. The creature's form collapsed inward, its dark energy drawn into a rapidly shrinking sphere that pulsed with the same gray light as the whisper blade. With a sound like the reverse of thunder, a sudden, deafening silence, the sphere imploded, leaving nothing behind but a fine coating of ash that settled slowly to the cathedral floor. The wave continued outward, passing through the walls of the cathedral and beyond, visible as a ripple of gray light that spread across the ashen sky of New Haven. Wherever it touched, the perpetually falling ash paused in midair, suspended for a heartbeat before resuming its descent. Celestria stood frozen, her expression a mask of disbelief and fury. "What have you done?" she whispered, her voice now small in the aftermath of Elysia's power. "I have undone your mistake," Elysia replied, lowering the sword. The gray light receded from the blade, though flecks of it remained, like stars in the darkness of its surface. "The Awakener has been returned to the void from which you summoned it. Be grateful I did not send you along with it." The remaining Wake Knights looked to Celestria uncertainly, their weapons still raised but their resolve clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. Archon had regained his feet and moved to stand beside Elysia, his own weapon trained on Celestria. "The Order of the Wake has lost its way," Elysia continued, addressing the knights rather than their leader. "Founded to prevent the misuse of power, it has instead become what it once opposed, wielders of destruction, seeking dominion rather than balance." Several of the knights exchanged glances, doubt evident in their postures. "Do not listen to her lies," Celestria hissed. "She is a relic of the age that brought ruin to our world. Her kind caused the collapse." "The collapse was caused by fear and the hunger for power," Elysia countered. "The same fear I see in you, Celestria. The same hunger that led you to bind an Awakener, risking the lives of everyone in New Haven." She turned to address the knights directly. "I do not seek to return Teralia to what it was before. That world is gone, and perhaps rightly so. But I offer a path forward, one that honors the knowledge of the past while building a better future. A future where ash does not forever fall from the sky, where balance is restored between the forces that shape our existence." One of the knights lowered his weapon slightly. "The prophecy spoke of an awakened queen who would end the reign of ash," he said hesitantly. "She is manipulating you," Celestria cried, her composure cracking. "The ash falls because of creatures like her. The Elar dynasty brought destruction upon us all." "Then why did you seek the Whisper Blade?" Orion spoke up, rising from his position by the mosaic. "If you truly believed the Elars were responsible for the collapse, why not destroy the sword when you found it? Why try to buy it from me?" Celestria's pale eyes narrowed to slits. "You understand nothing, archaeologist." "I understand enough," Orion replied. "I've spent my life studying the past, preserving what knowledge survived the collapse. The LRs weren't perfect, but they sought balance, a fusion of technology and what we now call magic, working in harmony rather than opposition. It was fear of that balance, the desire to control rather than coexist, that led to the final war." He gestured to Elysia. "She chose to sleep for 2 centuries, preserving what she could of that knowledge, not to rule over us but to guide us toward a better path." Another knight lowered his weapon, then another. Celestria looked around wildly as her forces wavered. "This is treason!" she shrieked. "The order does not bend." "Perhaps it should," said one of the knights, removing his helmet to reveal a young face marked with ash tattoos, symbols of rank within the order. "Perhaps we have been too rigid for too long." "Sir Tarek," Celestria spat, "I should have known your loyalty was suspect." "My loyalty is to Teralia," Tarek replied steadily, "to its people and its future. If the awakened queen offers a path to restore balance, to end the eternal ash, then I would hear her out." He looked to his fellow knights, as should we all. One by one, the remaining knights lowered their weapons. Celestria stood alone, her power and authority evaporating before her eyes. "This isn't over," she snarled, backing toward the cathedral entrance. "The order has stood for 2 centuries. It will not fall to a ghost from the past and a grave-robbing archaeologist." "The order need not fall at all," Elysia said calmly. "It can evolve, as all things must. Its purpose, to prevent another collapse, is noble. It is the methods that have strayed." Celestria's face contorted with rage. With a final venomous glare, she turned and fled through the cathedral entrance, disappearing into the ashen streets of New Haven. Tarek turned to Elysia and dropped to one knee. The other knights, following his example. "Awakened Queen," he said formally. "The Knights of the Order await your guidance." Alicia regarded them thoughtfully, then gestured for them to rise. "I do not seek blind obedience," she said. "That is Celestria's way, not mine. What I offer is partnership in the restoration of Terralia." She sheathed the whisper blade, its darkness now threaded with veins of permanent gray light. "The first step is understanding. Sir Tarek, gather those within the Order who question Celestria's path. Tell them what you have witnessed here today. Tell them their queen has awakened not to rule, but to restore." Tarek nodded, his expression solemn. "It will be done, Your Majesty." He turned to his fellow knights. "Secure the cathedral perimeter. Celestria will not go quietly." As the knights dispersed to their tasks, Alicia turned her attention to Orion, who stood quietly beside the now dormant mosaic. "You have questions," she said. "Not a query, but a statement of fact." "A few thousand," Orion admitted with a wry smile. "Starting with, what happens now?" "Now," Alicia said, moving to help Archon, who was tending to his wounded shoulder. "We begin the work of centuries. The binding of the Awakener was only the first demonstration of what can be accomplished when true balance is restored." She looked up at the damaged ceiling of the cathedral, through which ash still fell in lazy spirals. "The perpetual ash is a symptom of Terralia's imbalance, a physical manifestation of the disruption caused by the collapse. It can be reversed, but not quickly, and not alone." "You need allies," Orion surmised. "I need knowledge," Alicia corrected. "Your knowledge, specifically. I have slept for 200 years, preserved but not unchanging. My understanding of what Terralia has become is incomplete." She straightened, her bearing regal despite the chaotic surroundings. "You have spent your life uncovering the past, preserving what others would forget or destroy. Will you now help build a future that honors that past?" Orion considered the request. His life as an archaeologist had been solitary, focused on discovery and preservation with little thought to application. He had documented countless artifacts, recorded the history they represented, and then moved on to the next excavation. It was a life he had chosen, and it had suited him. But standing in the sound cathedral, witnessing the clash of old powers and new possibilities, he realized that preservation alone was not enough. Knowledge without purpose was merely collection. Interesting, perhaps, but ultimately static. "I'm not a revolutionary," he said finally. "I dig up old things and write about them." "And in doing so, you've gathered more understanding of how Terralia has changed than almost anyone alive," Alicia pointed out. "You know the ruins, the settlements, the flow of people and goods across what remains of our world. This knowledge is invaluable." Archon, his shoulder now bandaged, joined the conversation. "The Queen speaks truly," he said to Orion. "The Awakened have preserved the old knowledge, but we have lived in the shadows, cut off from much of what Terralia has become. Your perspective would bridge that gap." Orion ran a hand through his ash-dusted hair, a habit when deep in thought. "And what exactly would this partnership entail? I'm not joining a cult, awakened or otherwise." Alicia laughed, the sound surprisingly warm and genuine. "No cults," she promised. "What I propose is simple. Continue your work, but with purpose beyond mere documentation. Search for specific artifacts, locations, and knowledge that can aid in Terralia's restoration. Share what you find with us, and we will share what we know with you." "A fair exchange," Orion acknowledged. "But Celestria won't give up so easily. The Order of the Wake still controls much of New Haven, and they have eyes everywhere." "Which is why we must move quickly," Archon said. "The Queen's awakening will not remain secret for long. Already, word must be spreading through the settlement." As if to confirm his words, The sound of a distant commotion reached them, voices raised in excitement or alarm, the clatter of many feet on stone streets. "The people come," Elysia observed. "Some in fear, some in hope, most in curiosity." She turned to Orion. "Your decision, archaeologist. Do we face them together?" In that moment, looking at the queen who had slept for 2 centuries to help guide humanity toward a better future, Orion knew his answer. It wasn't just about artifacts anymore, or even knowledge for its own sake. It was about applying that knowledge, using it to heal a broken world. "Together," he agreed, offering his hand in the modern gesture of partnership. Elysia clasped it firmly, her grip strong despite her long sleep. "Then let us greet the future, Orion Vale, finder of lost things." They moved toward the cathedral entrance, where a crowd had begun to gather, citizens of New Haven, drawn by the rumors already spreading through the settlement. The gray light of Terralia's eternal dusk filtered through the ash, casting everything in muted tones of silver and shadow. As they appeared in the doorway, the awakened queen, the archaeologist, and the knight, a hush fell over the assembled onlookers. For a moment, no one moved or spoke, the tableau frozen in a heartbeat of possibility. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a voice called out, "The ash stopped falling. For a moment, it stopped." Another voice joined in. "I saw it too, when that light passed through the city." More voices rose, a chorus of confirmation and wonder. The wave of energy from the Whisper Blade had done more than just bind the Awakener. It had momentarily disrupted the eternal ashfall, giving the people of New Haven a glimpse of what could be. Elysia stepped forward, her presence commanding attention without effort. "People of Terralia," she began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the square before the cathedral. "I am Elysia Elar, last queen of the dynasty that fell with the collapse. For 2 centuries, I have slept, waiting for the time when balance might be restored to our world." She drew the Whisper Blade, holding it aloft so that all could see the darkness shot through with veins of gray light. "That time has come, not through conquest or force, but through understanding and cooperation. The eternal ash is not our fate. It is a wound that can be healed, if we work together." The crowd murmured, a mixture of awe, skepticism, and hope rippling through the gathered citizens. Some wore the expressions of those who had heard too many false promises. Others showed the wide-eyed wonder of those encountering something beyond their experience. A figure pushed forward, an older woman in the simple robes of a Knowledge Vault archivist. With a start, Orion recognized her as Master Thorn's assistant. "If you are truly the awakened Queen of Legend," the archivist called, "prove it. Show us a sign that you can do what you claim." The challenge hung in the air, a reasonable request given the extraordinary claims. Elysia nodded in acknowledgement, then raised the Whisper Blade once more. She closed her eyes in concentration, the sword beginning to hum with that now familiar resonance. The sound grew, not painfully loud, but pervasive, seeming to come from the air itself rather than any single source. As the resonance reached its peak, Elysia opened her eyes, now glowing with the same gray light that veined the blade, and made a sweeping gesture upward. The ash falling around them slowed, then stopped completely, suspended in midair like countless tiny stars. For a full minute, not a single mote of ash fell in the square before the cathedral. The crowd gasped collectively, many reaching up to touch the frozen particles, their faces transformed by wonder. Then, with a gentle exhale, Elysia lowered the sword. The ash resumed its descent, but something had changed. The particles no longer fell in the same random pattern. Instead, they swirled in elegant spirals before settling, forming intricate patterns on the ground that mirrored the mosaic inside the cathedral. "A beginning only," Elysia said as the display concluded. "A demonstration of what is possible when balance is restored. The full healing of Teralia will take time and the efforts of many. The archivist who had challenged her now dropped to her knees, not in subjugation, but in recognition. "The archives speak true," she said, her voice thick with emotion. The awakened queen returns as the gray light rises. Others in the crowd followed suit, kneeling or bowing their heads. But Alicia raised her hands in a gesture of negation. "Do not kneel," she commanded. "I do not seek subjects, but partners." The old ways of rule died with the collapse, as they should have. What rises now must be something new, a collaboration between those who remember the past and those who live in the present. She gestured to Orion, drawing him forward. "This man, Orion Vale, archaeologist and finder of lost things, returned the Whisper Blade to me not out of blind obedience, but out of reasoned choice. It is such choices, freely made, that will restore Teralia." The crowd's response was mixed. Some still knelt. Traditions of respect for royalty, deeply ingrained despite 2 centuries of absence. Others straightened, uncertain but intrigued by Alicia's words. A buzz of conversation spread through the gathering, growing in volume as the implications of what they had witnessed sank in. Archon leaned close to Alicia and Orion. "We should move to a more secure location," he murmured. "Celestria will be gathering her forces." "Where?" Orion asked. "My workshop is known to the Order, and the sanctuary below the cathedral is no longer secret." "The old observatory," Archon suggested. "It has been maintained by the Awakened for generations, and its location is known to few." Alicia nodded in agreement. "A fitting place to begin our work." She addressed the crowd once more. "People of New Haven, I do not ask for your loyalty or belief today, only that you watch and judge for yourselves in the days to come. The restoration of Teralia has begun, not with proclamations or promises, but with action." With that, she sheathed the Whisper Blade and stepped back, allowing Archon to guide her and Orion through a side entrance of the cathedral. Tarek and a few of the knights who had abandoned Celestria fell in around them, forming a protective escort as they moved away from the growing crowd. "That went better than I expected," Orion admitted, as they made their way through the narrow streets of the Eastern District. "I half thought they'd try to stone us." "People are weary of the eternal ash, of mere survival," Alicia replied. "They hunger for hope, even if they fear to embrace it fully." "And Celestria has become increasingly unpopular," added Tarek. "Her purges of forbidden technology have grown more aggressive in recent years, disrupting lives and livelihoods. Many in New Haven chafe under the Order's restrictions." They continued through the winding streets, gradually leaving the more populated areas behind. The buildings here were older, many dating from before the collapse but maintained with care, rather than left to ruin. Few people were about, and those they passed lowered their eyes respectfully at the sight of Archon and the knights. The old observatory stood on a hill at the eastern edge of the settlement, its dome a half-sphere of metal and glass that had somehow survived the collapse intact. Unlike most pre-collapse structures, it showed signs of continuous maintenance. No ash coated its surfaces, and the path leading to its entrance was clear and well-tended. "The Awakened have kept this place functioning for 2 centuries, Archon explained as they approached. "It has served as both watchtower and archive, allowing us to track the slow changes in Teralia's skies." He placed his hand on a panel beside the main entrance, which glowed briefly before the door slid open with a soft hiss of preserved mechanisms. Inside, the observatory was a blend of ancient technology and more recent adaptations. The central chamber was dominated by a massive telescope aimed through the slit in the dome above, its brass and copper components gleaming in the soft light provided by crystal lamps similar to those in the sanctuary below the cathedral. Around the edges of the chamber, Workstations held a mixture of pre-collapse devices and newer equipment cobbled together from salvaged parts. Several people in simple clothing looked up as the group entered, their expressions changing from surprise to reverence as they recognized Alicia. "My queen," said an elderly man, stepping forward and bowing deeply. "The awakening is complete, then?" "It is, Keeper Voss," Alicia replied warmly. "The Whisper Blade has returned to my hand, and with it, the hope of restoration." The old man straightened, tears glistening in his eyes. "Many of us feared this day would never come, that the Order would find and destroy the blade before it could fulfill its purpose. Their efforts were thwarted by Orion Vale," Alicia said, gesturing to the archaeologist. "A seeker of knowledge who chose to return the blade rather than surrender it to the Order's deceptions." Keeper Voss turned to Orion with an appraising gaze. "Then we owe you a great debt, archaeologist. The awakened have waited generations for the Queen's return." Orion shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. "I just did what seemed right at the time." "The best decisions often come from such simple beginnings," Voss said with a nod of approval. He turned back to Alicia. "What would you have us do, my queen? The observatory and all its resources are at your disposal." Alicia moved to the center of the chamber, looking up through the dome at the ashen sky above. "First, we need information. The world has changed in my absence, and before we can restore balance, we must understand what is currently out of balance." She turned to Orion. "This is where your knowledge becomes essential. You have traveled widely, seen more of current Terralia than anyone here. What are the most pressing issues facing our world?" Orion considered the question seriously. As an archaeologist, he had indeed traversed much of what remained of civilization, from the relative stability of settlements like New Haven to the most remote outposts clinging to existence in the ash-covered wilderness. "Resource scarcity is the most immediate concern," he said finally. "The perpetual ash makes traditional agriculture nearly impossible. Most settlements rely on engineered fungi and underground hydroponics, but the yields are barely sufficient. Hunger is a constant companion for many." He continued, warming to the topic. "Then there's the technological regression. Many of the most advanced pre-collapse systems still function, but few understand how to maintain them, let alone replicate them. When they fail, they cannot be replaced. The knowledge vaults preserve information, but practical application diminishes with each generation." "And the ash itself," added Tarek. "It clogs machinery, contaminates water sources, and causes respiratory illness. The Order teaches that it is divine punishment, but even many within our ranks have questioned why, after 2 centuries, the punishment has not abated." Alicia nodded thoughtfully. "These challenges are connected. The ash falls because the elemental balance of Terralia was disrupted during the collapse. The final battle unleashed energies that continue to cycle through our world, manifesting as the perpetual ashfall." She drew the Whisper Blade and laid it on a nearby table, its dark surface catching the light from the crystal lamps. "The sword contains knowledge as well as power, the understanding of how to restore that balance. But it cannot be done from a single location, nor by a single individual, no matter how powerful." "What do we need?" asked Archon. "3 things," Alicia replied. "First, we must reactivate the harmonic network, a system of resonance points established by the Elar dynasty throughout Terralia. These points, when properly aligned, can channel and redistribute elemental energies." She looked to Orion. "Many of these points would now be hidden in ruins, forgotten, or dismissed as mere decorative elements, like the mosaic in the Sound Cathedral. Your archaeological expertise will be crucial in locating them." Orion nodded, already mentally cataloging ruins he had explored that contained similar patterns. "I've seen such designs in several locations. Never realized they were functional technology." "The division between technology and magic is a false one," Alicia said. a misconception that contributed to the collapse. The harmonic network operates on principles that bridge that artificial divide. She continued. Second, we need to gather and coordinate individuals with the aptitude to work with these energies. Those you would now call mages or technicians, but who in my time were simply known as harmonists. They exist even now, though many hide their abilities for fear of the Order's persecution. The Order has indeed hunted such individuals, Tarek confirmed grimly. Celestria calls them corruption vectors, potential triggers for another collapse. And third, Elysia concluded, we need time and security to accomplish the first two goals. Celestria, and those loyal to her, will oppose us at every turn. They believe the only safe path forward is the elimination of all pre-collapse knowledge and power. The gravity of the task before them settled over the chamber. It wasn't just about defeating Celestria, or even ending the eternal ash. It was about fundamentally changing how the survivors of the collapse viewed their world and their place in it. So, we're to be archaeologists, recruiters, and revolutionaries all at once. Orion summarized with a wry smile. Nothing too challenging, then. A ripple of surprised laughter broke the tension in the room. Elysia's eyes crinkled with amusement. I did not claim it would be easy, finder of lost things. Only that it is necessary. Where do we begin? Asked Keeper Voss. With what we have, Elysia replied pragmatically. This observatory is an ideal base of operations, remote enough for security, but connected to New Haven for access to resources and information. She turned to Tarek. Can you estimate how many within the Order might be persuaded to our cause? The Knight considered this. Perhaps a third would follow my lead immediately. Another third might be swayed with evidence and time. The remainder are either true believers in Celestria's vision, or too frightened to defy her. And the general population of New Haven? Mostly apathetic, Orion interjected. Survival takes precedence over ideology for most people. They'll support whoever seems most likely to improve their immediate circumstances. Then we must show them tangible benefits quickly. Elysia decided. The demonstration at the cathedral was a start, a momentary reprieve from the ash. But we need something more substantial, more lasting. She traced a finger along the surface of the whisper blade, following one of the veins of gray light that now permanently marked its darkness. There is a secondary resonance point beneath this very observatory, a smaller version of the mosaic in the cathedral. If activated, it could create a permanent zone of clarity around the building and potentially improve growing conditions for several hundred yards in all directions. Enough for a demonstration garden, Keeper Voss said, excitement coloring his voice. We could grow surface crops without protective enclosures, something not seen in New Haven for generations. Exactly, Elysia nodded. A visible, tangible demonstration of what balance restoration can achieve. Not grand promises or messianic proclamations, but real food growing in open air. The strategy was sound. Orion had seen enough would-be saviors come and go in settlements across Terralia to know that grand visions rarely swayed the general population. But fresh vegetables growing in soil exposed to open sky? That would turn heads and change minds faster than any sermon or manifesto. I know several botanists at the Knowledge Vaults who would eagerly participate in such a project, he offered. They've been experimenting with ash-resistant plant strains for years, with limited success due to the conditions. Excellent, Elysia said. While you coordinate with them, Arkan and I will activate the resonance point. Tarek, I suggest you return to the Order and gather those knights willing to join our cause. The sooner we establish a protective presence here, the better. As the group dispersed to their assigned tasks, Orion found himself momentarily alone with Elysia. The Queen was studying a large map of Terralia, displayed on one wall of the observatory, her expression contemplative. Second thoughts? She asked without turning, somehow sensing his gaze. A few, Orion admitted. Until 3 days ago. I was just an archaeologist looking for interesting artifacts to document and preserve. Now I'm apparently part of a movement to fundamentally transform our world. It's a lot to process." Alicia turned to face him, her gray eyes reflecting the crystal lamplight. "You could still walk away, take your knowledge and skills elsewhere, return to the life you knew. I would not think less of you for it." The offer was genuine. Orion could tell. Despite everything that had happened, despite the importance she had placed on his involvement, she was giving him a true choice. He considered it briefly, returning to his solitary excavations, his careful documentation, his life of discovery without application. It had been a good life, in its way, purposeful, if limited in scope. But the memory of the ash freezing in mid-air above the cathedral square lingered in his mind. The wonder on the faces of New Haven's citizens, the momentary glimpse of what could be. How could he go back to merely preserving the past when he had the chance to help shape the future? "I'm staying," he said firmly, "though I reserve the right to complain about it regularly." Alicia's smile was warm, transforming her regal features into something more approachable, more human. "I would expect nothing less. Finder of lost things. Complaints are often the first step toward better solutions." She returned her attention to the map, tracing a finger along what had once been a major transit route between population centers. "We have much to do, and forces already aligning against us. But today, we have made a beginning." Through the dome of the observatory, the eternal ash continued to fall. But now, Orion could see it, not as an unchangeable fact of existence, but as a problem to be solved, a wound to be healed. And for the first time in a very long time, he felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope. In the days that followed, the old observatory became a center of frenetic activity. True to her word, Alicia and Arkan activated the resonance point beneath the structure, creating a dome of energy that repelled the falling ash within a radius of several hundred yards. The effect was visually striking, a perfect circle of clear air in the otherwise gray landscape, through which actual sunlight occasionally penetrated when the ashen clouds momentarily thinned. Orion brought botanists from the knowledge vaults, who arrived skeptical but departed wide-eyed with possibility after seeing the protected zone. Within a week, they had established experimental garden plots, planting seeds preserved from before the collapse alongside hardier strains developed in the post-collapse era. Tarek returned with nearly 40 knights who had abandoned the order, bringing with them news that Celestria had declared Alicia an impostor and enemy of Terralia. The Order's official position was that the events at the Sound Cathedral had been a mass hallucination caused by forbidden technology, a claim that fell flat with those who had witnessed the ash momentarily stop falling. Word of the clear zone around the observatory spread through New Haven like wildfire. Citizens began making pilgrimages to see it for themselves, many bringing offerings of food, tools, or services in exchange for the chance to stand in unfiltered sunlight and breathe air free of ash for the first time in their lives. Not all reactions were positive. There were those who viewed the changes with suspicion, particularly older citizens who had been raised on the Order's teachings about the dangers of pre-collapse knowledge. Others simply feared change of any kind, preferring the familiar struggle of current existence to the uncertainties of transformation. Celestria capitalized on these fears, her remaining loyal forces spreading rumors that the clear zone was temporary, that it would collapse catastrophically, that it was draining life energy from those who entered it. When these claims proved false, she shifted tactics, declaring that Alicia's powers came from a pact with void entities like the Awakener, a particularly ironic accusation given Celestria's own attempt to control such a being. Through it all, Alicia maintained a steady, pragmatic approach. She made no grand pronouncements, issued no decrees. Instead, she focused on tangible results, the growing plants in the demonstration garden, the expansion of the clear zone as additional, smaller resonance points were activated in the surrounding area. The training of individuals discovered to have harmonic aptitude. Orion found himself busier than he had ever been. His archaeological knowledge was in constant demand, as Alicia's team worked to identify and locate additional components of the harmonic network. He split his time between the observatory, where he compared his field notes to ancient maps recovered from the sanctuary beneath the Sound Cathedral, and carefully planned expeditions to ruins that might contain resonance points. It was during one such expedition, 3 weeks after Alicia's awakening, that Orion first encountered direct opposition from the Order. He had traveled to the Western Ruins, once a major transportation hub before the collapse, accompanied by 2 of Tarek's knights and a young harmonist named Lyra, whose ability to sense energy patterns had proven invaluable in previous explorations. The ruins were vast, a maze of collapsed buildings and twisted metal that had once been a marvel of engineering. Orion led the group confidently through the labyrinth, following markers he had documented in previous visits. "The central terminal should be just ahead," he said, consulting his notes. If the patterns hold true, the resonance point would be in what was once the main concourse, a large, open area designed for acoustic amplification. Lyra, a slender woman with intricate ash tattoos that marked her as a former Order acolyte before she revealed her harmonic abilities, closed her eyes and extended her hands. "There's something," she confirmed after a moment. "A vibration pattern, very faint but structured. Definitely not natural decay or settlement." They moved forward cautiously, the knights scanning for potential hazards, both the natural dangers of unstable ruins and the possibility of less natural threats. The passage opened into a vast space, its ceiling partially collapsed, but much of the original architecture still intact. Sweeping arches supported what remained of a glass dome, through which ash filtered in lazy spirals, accumulating in drifts on the ornate floor. "There," Orion said, pointing to a circular pattern in the center of the floor, partially obscured by ash, but recognizable as similar to the mosaic in the Sound Cathedral. "That's our resonance point." As the group approached the center of the concourse, movement caught Orion's eye, shadows detaching from the periphery of the chamber, figures in the distinctive armor of Wake Knights, but with modifications that suggested greater combat capability. "Order Strike Team," one of their escorts hissed, drawing his weapon. "Special Forces!" The Order Knights surrounded them quickly, moving with practiced precision. At their center stood a tall figure in ornate armor, adorned with symbols of authority within the Order hierarchy. "Commander Vex," Tarek's knight identified the leader. "Celestria's enforcer. Traitors and grave robbers." Vex's voice boomed through the chamber, amplified by his helmet. "You desecrate sacred ground with your presence." Orion stepped forward, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "This is an archaeological expedition, Commander. We claim sanctuary under the Ancient Sites Accord." The Ancient Sites Accord was one of the few agreements that had survived the collapse intact, a recognition that the knowledge contained in ruins belonged to all of humanity, not to any particular faction. Even the Order typically respected it, if grudgingly. "The Accord does not apply to those who serve the False Queen," Vex replied coldly. "Surrender now, and your deaths will be quick. Resist, and you will experience the full measure of the Order's justice." The knights flanking Orion moved into defensive positions, placing themselves between the archaeologist, Lyra, and the Order forces. They were outnumbered at least 3-1, with more Order knights potentially hidden in the shadows of the vast chamber. "We don't seek conflict," Orion tried again. "Our work here benefits all of Terralia. Your work undermines the natural order." Vex cut him off. "The ash falls as punishment for the sins of the past. To interfere is to invite greater disaster." He raised a hand, signaling his forces. "Take them." The Order Knights advanced, weapons raised. Orion's escorts responded in kind, energy weapons humming as they powered up. Just as conflict seemed inevitable, Lyra stepped forward, her hands raised. "Wait!" she called, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Listen!" A sound was growing, a low hum emanating from the resonance point in the center of the chamber. The ash, covering the mosaic pattern, had begun to vibrate, forming intricate, shifting designs as the particles responded to the emerging frequency. The resonance point, Orion realized. It's activating on its own. "Abomination!" Vex shouted. "Destroy it!" Several Order Knights rushed forward, intent on damaging the pattern in the floor. But as they approached, the humming intensified, and the ash around the mosaic rose into the air, swirling in a tight vortex that forced the knights back. The vortex expanded rapidly, encompassing the entire central area of the chamber. Within it, the ash particles began to glow with a now familiar gray light, the same that veined the whisper blade and flecked Alicia's eyes. "It's connected to the Queen somehow," Lyra said in wonder. "The network is awakening." Commander Vex was undeterred. "Technomancy," he spat. "The very corruption we are sworn to cleanse." He gestured to his forces. "Concentrated fire on the pattern." Before the Order Knights could comply, the vortex collapsed inward, the glowing ash condensing into a swirling sphere above the mosaic. For a heartbeat, it hung there, pulsing like a living thing. Then, it expanded outward in a wave of gray light, identical to what had emanated from the whisper blade in the Sound Cathedral. The wave passed through everyone in the chamber, Order and Awakened alike. Where it touched, it left a momentary outline of gray light around each person, brighter around Lyra, barely visible around Commander Vex, varying intensities around the others. When the light faded, the chamber had transformed. The ash was gone, not just from the air, but from every surface, as if it had never been. The resonance point in the floor glowed softly, with internal light. The patterns now clearly visible and active. And most strikingly, weak sunlight streamed through the partially collapsed dome above, unfiltered by the usual ashen haze. The Order Knights stood frozen, their weapons still raised but their resolve visibly shaken. Even Commander Vex seemed momentarily at a loss, his imposing presence diminished by the unexpected transformation. Orion seized the moment. "You see, this is what we seek, not destruction, but restoration. The ash is not punishment, it's imbalance, and it can be corrected." Lyra stepped forward, her hands still raised but now glowing faintly with the same gray light. "I was one of you," she addressed the Order Knights. "I believed as you do, but I've seen what balance truly means, what it can accomplish. This," she gestured to the now clear chamber, "is just the beginning." Several of the Order Knights exchanged uncertain glances. One lowered his weapon slightly, then another. Commander Vex noticed and barked a command. "Hold fast. This is deception, designed to weaken your resolve." But his words lacked their former authority. In the clear light now filling the chamber, the ash tattoos marking his rank seemed faded, less imposing. "Is it deception?" Orion challenged. "Or is it simply truth you haven't been allowed to see?" He addressed the knights directly. "How long has the Order promised that the ash would stop falling once humanity had atoned sufficiently? 2 centuries of atonement, and yet it continues, except here, now, where balance has been restored." A murmur ran through the Order ranks. Vex raised his weapon, aiming not at Orion or his companions, but at the glowing resonance point. "Enough! I will not allow this corruption to spread." Before he could fire, one of his own knights stepped in front of him. "Commander, please, we should report this to the Grand Mage. Let her decide." Vex backhanded the knight with his armored gauntlet, sending him sprawling. The Grand Mage's orders were clear: destroy the resonance points and those who seek to activate them. The harsh action broke whatever spell of uncertainty had held the Order forces. Several more knights lowered their weapons, stepping away from Vex. Others seemed torn, looking to each other for guidance. Taking advantage of the confusion, Orion's escorts moved quickly, positioning themselves around the resonance point. Lyra knelt beside it, her hands hovering over the glowing patterns, reinforcing whatever connection had been established. Vex, seeing his forces wavering, made a decision. "Those loyal to the Order, withdraw," he commanded. "We will return with reinforcements." He leveled a cold gaze at Orion. "This isn't over, archaeologist. The false queen's deceptions may sway the weak-minded, but the true Order remains steadfast." With that, he and those knights still loyal to him backed away, disappearing into the shadows at the periphery of the chamber. Nearly half of his original force remained behind, their weapons lowered, uncertainty plain, even through their helmets. One stepped forward, removing her helmet to reveal a young woman with the ash tattoos of a senior acolyte. "I am Seren," she introduced herself. "What we just witnessed, is it real? Permanent?" "The effect should last as long as the resonance point remains active," Orion explained. "And if properly integrated into the broader harmonic network, it could expand to cover much more territory." "We were taught that such technologies cause the collapse," another knight said, also removing his helmet. "That to use them again invites the same destruction." "It wasn't the technology that caused the collapse," Orion replied. "It was the misuse of it, the pursuit of power without wisdom, advancement without balance. What we're doing now is fundamentally different. We're not creating new imbalances, we're correcting existing ones." He gestured to the clear air, the sunlight streaming through the dome. "This is what Terralia looked like before the ash, and what it can look like again, not through denial or destruction of the past, but through understanding and restoration." Seren looked around the chamber, her expression a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. "If what you say is true, then the Order's fundamental teachings are incomplete," Orion finished diplomatically. "Based on fear rather than understanding. The Order's goal, preventing another collapse, is noble, but their methods have become counterproductive." The knights conferred among themselves briefly. Then Seren turned back to Orion. "We wish to see this clear zone at the observatory, to judge for ourselves the truth of what you claim." It was more than Orion had hoped for. "You would be welcome," he said. "The Queen receives all who come with open minds, regardless of their previous affiliations." As they prepared to leave the western ruins, the resonance point now securely activated and integrated into the growing network, Orion couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. The confrontation could have ended very differently, with bloodshed and destruction rather than conversion and understanding. Perhaps Elysia's approach was working after all, not through force or decree, but through demonstration and choice. Each activated resonance point, each clear zone established, each mind changed represented a step toward the restoration she envisioned. The eternal ash would not end overnight. Celestria and her loyalists would not simply surrender their power and influence. The path ahead remained long and fraught with danger. But for the first time since the collapse, there was a visible alternative to endless gray skies and the slow suffocation of knowledge and growth. There was a future worth building, worth fighting for, if necessary. And Orion Vale, once content to merely document the past, now found himself helping to write a new chapter in Terralia's history. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But as he led the expanded group back toward the observatory, walking through patches of sunlight unmarred by falling ash, he knew he wouldn't have it any other way. The Whisperblade had indeed awakened something, not just a queen from centuries past, but a possibility, long thought lost, that tomorrow might be better than today, that the world broken as it was, could be mended. And that, Orion reflected, as the clear zone around the observatory came into view on the horizon. Its dome of protection, now visible from miles away, was a truth worth uncovering. The greatest artifact of all, hope, restored after centuries buried beneath the ash of despair. In the fading light of day, as New Haven's silhouette stood stark against the ashen sky, Alicia stood atop the observatory dome, the whisper blade gleaming in her hand. Below, Orion and his expanded company approached, new converts walking alongside longtime allies. The blade hummed with quiet satisfaction, its darkness now permanently threaded with veins of gray light. A balance achieved, a promise kept, a new beginning born from ancient knowledge. "Welcome home, finder of lost things," Alicia whispered, though Orion was still too far away to hear. "Together, we will restore what was broken, not as it was, but as it should be." And the sword, once just a relic in a forgotten temple, resonated with her words, sending ripples of harmony outward into a world slowly awakening from 2 centuries of ash and shadow.